Welcome aboard the dark waters of the Night Crew podcast, where true crime meets the unknown. Each month we dive into the eerie, the unsolved, and the stories that haunt the shadows. If it's creepy, mysterious, or just plain unsettling, you'll find it here. So light your lantern, step onto the deck, and prepare to uncover what lies beneath the surface.
This podcast contains discussions of true crime, disturbing content, and mature themes that may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is strongly advised. The Night Crew podcast aims to present stories with respect to the victims and their families, and the intent is never to sensationalize tragedy, but to shed light on the unknown and unexplained.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 33 of The Night Crew, where we explore true crime, unsolved mysteries, haunted places, and the darkest stories history has left behind. Join us as we uncover chilling cases, mysterious disappearances, and eerie legends that continue to captivate and haunt us today. Tonight, we're heading to Cleveland, Ohio, during the dark days of the Great Depression. A city already struggling with poverty and uncertainty would soon be gripped by fear as bodies began appearing across the city. The victims were mutilated, dismembered, and often impossible to identify. The killer became known as the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. Despite a massive investigation involving one of America's most famous lawmen, the murders were never solved. Nearly a century later, the mystery remains. This is the story of the Cleveland Torso Murders. To understand the Cleveland Torso Murders, we first have to understand Cleveland itself. It's the mid-1930s, and America is in the grip of the Great Depression. Jobs are scarce, families are struggling to survive, and thousands of people are searching for any way to make it through another day. In Cleveland, many of the city's poorest residents gathered in an area known as Kingsbury Run. Hidden beneath railroad tracks and surrounded by industry, it was a sprawling collection of makeshift shacks and camps built by the homeless, unemployed, and those society had largely forgotten. Life there was hard. Food was scarce. Crime was very common. During the Depression years, Cleveland experienced high levels of crime compared to earlier decades, driven by widespread poverty, unemployment, and overcrowded living conditions. The most common crimes included theft, burglary, robbery, illegal gambling, bootlegging, prostitution, and assaults. People came and went without much notice. If someone disappeared, there often wasn't a family member to report it. No employer wondering where they were. No one asking questions. It was the perfect place for a predator to hide. And before long, someone would begin taking advantage of that fact. A killer was stalking the shadows of Cleveland, targeting the people least likely to be missed. The city didn't know it yet, but it was about to become home to one of the most gruesome unsolved murder cases in American history. The first sign that something was wrong came in 1934. The Lady of the Lake was discovered on September 5th, 1934, nearly a year before the officially recognized torso murders began. A young man found part of a woman's body washed up on the shore of Lake Erie near Bracknell, just east of Cleveland. Only the lower portion of her torso and a few additional body parts were recovered. Her head was never found. making identification nearly impossible. The coroner estimated she was in her mid-30s. Investigators also noted an abdominal scar consistent with a prior surgery, possibly a hysterectomy. Her skin had been treated with a chemical that turned it red, leathery, and preserved it unusually well. Investigators later noticed the same type of chemical treatment on another suspected torso murder victim. Several people reportedly claimed to have seen additional body parts floating in the lake, including fishermen who believed they saw a severed head. But those reports never led to a complete recovery. When she was found, police did not connect her death to a serial killer. Only after later victims appeared did investigators begin considering her part of the same pattern. Because she predated the official series, many researchers call her Victim Zero. The reality is that the victims of what would become the Cleveland torso murders were found in a variety of unsettling and often accidental ways. Most of the bodies were discovered in remote, forgotten areas of the city. Places like Kingsbury Run, along the Cuyahoga River, vacant lots, and industrial wastelands where few people regularly went. And they were rarely found by investigators. Instead, they were stumbled upon. Children exploring overgrown hillsides, workers cutting through railroad land, homeless residents scavenging for materials just to survive another day. In a city struggling through the Great Depression, people move through these forgotten spaces constantly, and sometimes what they found changed everything. On the afternoon of September 23rd, 1935, two boys were playing on an embankment known as Jackass Hill in the Kingsbury Run area. As they explored the overgrown hillside, they stumbled upon the nude, headless body of a man lying in the weeds. Terrified, they ran for help. When police arrived and searched the area, they discovered a second decapitated body nearby. The scene was horrifying. Both victims had been decapitated. Both were found nude, except one was still wearing socks. Both had been mutilated. Their heads were later found buried separately near the bodies. Investigators found little blood at the scene, suggesting the murders had occurred elsewhere, and the bodies were dumped on the hillside afterward. One of the victims was identified through fingerprints as Edward Audrassi, a 29-year-old former hospital orderly who was unemployed at the time of his death. His family had last seen him only a few days earlier. Investigators determined he had likely been dead for about 2 to 3 days before being found. They also noted rope burns on his wrists, suggesting he may have been restrained before his death. The second victim, often called Jane Doe 1, has never been identified. Investigators estimated he was older than Edward and may have been dead for weeks before the discovery. What made his case especially strange was that his skin was also reddish and leathery because it had been treated with some type of chemical or preservative. So why did this discovery change everything? Before September 23rd, police had no reason to believe a serial killer was operating in Cleveland. but finding two headless, mutilated men together made it impossible to ignore the possibility that someone was systematically killing and dismembering people. This was the moment the city first came face to face with what newspapers would eventually call the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. As the months went on, more bodies began appearing across Cleveland. Some were found near the river. Others in empty fields or hidden among industrial debris. The remains were often badly mutilated, dismembered, decapitated, and in many cases so decomposed or incomplete that identification was nearly impossible. And here are some more stories about the bodies found. One of them was the tattooed man. So this was in June of 1936. A pair of boys found a severed head wrapped in pants near a bridge in Kingsbury Run. The next day, police found the body nearby. Unlike many other victims, he wasn't heavily dismembered beyond the decapitation. What made him remarkable was that he had 6 distinctive tattoos, including a butterfly, Cupid, an anchor, and the name Helen and Paul. Police were convinced someone would recognize him. They even displayed a death mask and diagrams of his tattoos at the huge Great Lakes exposition where hundreds of thousands of people saw them, but nobody ever identified him. And you can actually see those death masks on the Cleveland Police Museum website. It's a really interesting website because they have a lot more pictures, and then they have 4 different death masks of some of the victims that you can search for online. One of the other victims, this was in January of 1936, was named Florence Polio. A woman discovered baskets sitting beside a manufacturing building. Inside were body parts wrapped neatly in newspaper. About 10 days later, additional remains were found in a nearby vacant lot. Unlike many victims, Florence was identified through fingerprints. Investigators determined the killer had waited until rigor mortis set in before dismembering the body, suggesting a planned approach. The Euclid Beach victim, February 1937. One of the strangest discoveries occurred when part of a woman's body washed ashore near Euclid Beach. The remains had been wrapped in rags, paper, and cardboard before entering the water. This victim was found along the Lake Erie shoreline, eerily close to where the Lady of the Lake had been discovered years earlier. Then there were the bodies found near Eliot Ness's office. On the same day in 1937, another victim's remains were discovered on Cleveland's lakefront in plain view of where Eliot Ness worked. And I will explain him in a little bit. Some historians believe this may have been a deliberate taunt aimed at investigators. Imagine being the city's top lawmen and finding another victim practically on your doorstep. The last 2 victims, August 1938. The final known victims were discovered in a shocking location, near East 9th Street, close to downtown Cleveland. One was a woman and one was a man. Their skeletal remains were found together, suggesting they may have been dumped at the same time. By then, public fear was at its peak and pressure on Eliot Ness was immense. At first, police believed they were dealing with unrelated cases scattered across a struggling city. but the pattern was becoming harder to ignore. Cleveland was no longer witnessing random discoveries. It was witnessing the work of a killer. By the time more bodies began surfacing, Cleveland police could no longer treat these as unrelated deaths. A pattern was emerging. Most of the victims shared the same disturbing condition. They had been dismembered. Heads were often removed entirely, making identification nearly impossible. In several cases, limbs were separated with a level of precision that shocked investigators. This wasn't random violence. It suggested planning, control, and a certain knowledge of anatomy. Some bodies showed signs that they had been carefully cut after death. Others appeared to have been handled in a way that suggested the killer was experienced, even structured. The level of mutilation went far beyond what police were used to seeing in typical homicide cases of the era. And then there was the placement. Many of the remains were left in open, visible areas, near riverbanks, along railroad cuts, or in abandoned industrial zones. It wasn't always clear whether the killer was trying to hide the bodies or simply discard them where they would eventually be found. As the discoveries continued, newspapers began picking up on the gruesome details. Sensational headlines spread fear across the city. Reporters began referring to the unknown attacker with a name that captured both the brutality of the crimes and the fear-gripping Cleveland. The Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. The name stuck. It turned the killer into something larger than a person. An idea, a shadow moving through the forgotten parts of the city, selecting victims from the margins of society and leaving behind only fragments. And as panic grew, so did pressure on law enforcement to stop it. Cleveland was no longer just investigating murders. It was hunting a butcher it could not see. As fear spread across Cleveland, city officials faced mounting pressure to find the person responsible. The murders were making national headlines, and residents were demanding answers. At the center of that pressure was Eliot Ness. By the mid-1930s, Ness was already a household name. He had gained national fame as a prohibition agent who helped take down notorious gangster Al Capone in Chicago. In 1935, he accepted a new role in Cleveland as the city's director of public safety, overseeing both the police and fire departments. When the Torso murders began capturing public attention, Ness found himself responsible for one of the most difficult investigations of his career. Unlike organized crime, there was no clear network to infiltrate. Unlike a robbery or a gang shooting, there were few witnesses, little physical evidence, and many victims whose identities were unknown. The killer seemed to appear without warning and disappear just as quickly. As more bodies were discovered, Ness expanded the investigation. Detectives interviewed hundreds of people, followed countless leads, and searched for anyone with medical training or experience that might explain the precision of the mutilations. Despite these efforts, the killer remained elusive. Frustrated and determined to stop the murders, Ness turned his attention to Kingsbury Run. He believed the area's sprawling shanty towns provided the perfect environment for the killer to operate unnoticed. In August 1938, another set of remains were discovered nearby. Ness ordered a massive raid on the camps. Police rounded up residents for questioning, destroyed makeshift shelters, and burned large sections of the shantytown. The operation made headlines across the country, but it also sparked criticism. Many believed the city's poorest residents were being punished rather than protected. And despite the dramatic show of force, police still had no arrest. Then, something strange happened. After the raid, the murders appeared to stop. Whether the killer was frightened away, moved elsewhere, died, or was somehow connected to the people displaced from Kingsbury Run remains unknown. For Eliot Ness, the case will become a lasting shadow over his career. Though he successfully reduced corruption and improved public safety in Cleveland, he never solved the mystery of the Mad Butcher. And decades later, neither has anyone else. Although Ness never officially named a suspect, there was one man investigators kept returning to. A doctor with a troubled past, a knowledge of anatomy, and a connection to the investigation that many believe was too close to ignore. His name was Dr. Francis E. Sweeney. Sweeney served in a medical unit during World War I, where he reportedly assisted with battlefield amputations and suffered nerve damage from a poison gas attack. After the war, he struggled with anxiety, depression, and alcoholism. By the mid-1930s, his drinking had become severe enough to contribute to the breakdown of his marriage. He lived and worked near the murder zone. One reason investigators focused on him was geography. He had worked as a surgical resident at a hospital near Kingsbury Run and maintained connections in the area. Some researchers have argued that his access to medical facilities and morgues would have given him a private place to dismember bodies if he were the killer. Sweeney had experience performing surgeries and treating severe injuries during the war. He understood human anatomy in a way few people did. Investigators believe the precision seen in some of the mutilations could have required that kind of knowledge. As the investigation intensified, Sweeney came to the attention of both Cleveland police and Eliot Ness himself. According to later accounts, Ness became convinced that Sweeney was involved in the murders. The problem was proving it. There was no DNA testing in the 1930s. Fingerprint evidence was limited. Witnesses were scarce. Most of the victims couldn't even be identified, making it nearly impossible to connect a suspect to them. In an effort to learn more, investigators subjected Sweeney to extensive questioning. He even underwent polygraph examinations, which were still a relatively new technology at the time. Reports suggest the results were troubling, though they were far from reliable by modern standards. Despite growing suspicion, prosecutors believed there wasn't enough evidence to secure a conviction. And then the situation became even stranger. Not long after becoming a primary suspect, Sweeney voluntarily admitted himself to a mental institution. From there, he would spend much of the remainder of his life under psychiatric care. Yet even after his institutionalization, questions remained. Was he genuinely suffering from mental illness? Was he hiding from investigators? Or was he simply an innocent man who happened to fit the profile police were looking for? What makes the story even more unsettling is what happened next. For years afterward, Eliot Ness reportedly received taunting and threatening letters believed to have been sent by Sweeney. The messages mocked investigators and suggested the killer knew he would never be brought to justice. Some of the letters were allegedly signed with variations of Sweeney's name or initials. The correspondence continued into the 1950s and reportedly stopped only after Ness died. Whether those letters truly came from Sweeney has never been proven, but for many historians and true crime researchers, he remains the strongest suspect in the entire case. And yet, despite all the suspicion, all the theories, and all the years of investigation, no one was ever charged with the Cleveland torso murders. The Mad Butcher's identity remains one of America's oldest and most chilling unsolved mysteries. Nearly a century has passed since the Cleveland torso murders terrified the city, yet the mystery remains unsolved. Of the victims linked to the case, several were never identified. They were buried without names, leaving behind no answers for investigators and no closure for families who may never have known what happened to their loved ones. Over the years, countless theories have emerged. Some believe Dr. Francis Sweeney was almost certainly the Mad Butcher and escaped justice due to a lack of evidence. Some investigators believe the killer may not have been a doctor at all. The dismemberment wasn't always surgical. In some cases, the cuts appeared rough rather than precise. This led to theories that the killer may have worked in a slaughterhouse, been a butcher, or worked in meat processing. During the 1930s, Cleveland had numerous industrial facilities where such skills would have been common. Because many bodies were found near rail lines and industrial corridors, some researchers believe the killer may have been transient. This theory suggests the killer traveled frequently. Victims were chosen from homeless populations, and the murders may have extended beyond Cleveland, Ohio. A minority of researchers argue that not all the murders belong to the same offender. Reasons include different methods of disposal, different levels of mutilation, and the long time span of the crimes. This theory suggests police may have grouped several unrelated murders together under one Mad Butcher label. Many experts disagree, pointing to the similarities between the victims and the manner of dismemberment. It could have been, I'm thinking copycat killer, if that's what they're thinking, but I think it was just one guy. There's no way there was this many people trying to copy the work that he did. Another theory is the unknown killer theory, which suggests that the killer may have never appeared on police radar at all. When people look back on famous unsolved cases, there's often an assumption that investigators interviewed the culprit and simply couldn't prove it. But sometimes the real offender is someone completely overlooked. Given how many victims were unidentified and how limited forensic science was in the 1930s, it's entirely possible the Mad Butcher was never seriously investigated. Others argue that investigators focused too heavily on one suspect and may have overlooked the real killer entirely. What makes the case so frustrating is that many of the investigative tools we rely on today simply just didn't exist in the 1930s. There was no DNA testing, no forensic genealogy, and no modern crime scene analysis. Detectives were forced to rely largely on witness statements, physical observations, and instinct. In recent years, researchers and forensic experts have renewed interest in the case. Efforts have been made to identify some of the unknown victims using modern forensic techniques, offering hope that even after all this time, new answers may still emerge. But perhaps the most haunting question isn't who the killer was, it's how many victims there really were. Officially, investigators connected more than a dozen murders to the Mad Butcher, but many experts believe the true number may have been much higher. During the Great Depression, countless people lived on the margins of society. Some disappeared without reports being filed. Others had no family searching for them. If that's true, the full scope of the killer's crimes may never be known. Today, the Cleveland Torso murders remains one of America's most infamous unsolved serial murder cases. The names of some victims have been lost to history, the identity of the killer remains unknown, and the truth died with the generation that lived through it all. What remains are the questions. Who was the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run? How did they evade capture? And could the answer have been sitting right in front of investigators all along? Thank you for listening to The Night Crew tonight. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow the podcast and join us next time as we explore another true crime mystery, haunted location, or unexplained story from history. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.